Hey, and we're back. That's never happened before. I've never had to stop a live video and restart and divide it up into a part one or part two. I am so sorry. You just have to laugh at that. But right as I was getting going, right as we were getting going and about to read Mark, construction noise just started happening right on the edge of my backyard. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for your flexibility. What I was beginning to say, and you probably could not hear, was that in the Gospel of Mark, we find what we'll call these sandwiches of basically a story within a story. So one story kind of serves as the pieces of bread, and it'll begin, and then it'll get interrupted by another story, only to continue after that story is over. So in Mark 5, we have such a story that begins in verse 21 and goes all the way through the end of the chapter. But we're going to stop today at verse 34 because these stories are so important that it is important to look at each one of them individually and kind of zoom in. But we don't want to lose sight of the fact that Mark has one inside the other intentionally. They're connected. The inner story is amplified by the outer story. So we'll come back and we'll finish kind of this little sandwich tomorrow. But for today, starting in verse 21, when Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and so he stayed by the seashore. One of the synagogue officials named Jairus came up, and on seeing him, fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she will get well and live." And he went off with him, and a large crowd was following him and pressing in on him. A woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and had endured much at the hands of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but rather had grown worse. After hearing about Jesus, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak. For she thought, "If I just touch his garments, I will get well." Immediately, we see that word a lot, don't we? Immediately, the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Immediately, Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power proceeding from him had gone forth, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see the woman who had done this. But the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." Now, in the next verse, we will come back to Jairus, the synagogue leader, and his daughter as Jesus continues, because the experience with the woman touching his garment and being healed happened on the way, right? And this happens a lot in Mark's gospel. A lot of things happen on the way. So in this passage, Jesus crosses over again. So just for a little backstory, we're told by the wording and in context clues and a little historical homework that Jairus would have been like a president of the local synagogue. And N.T. Wright helps me understand this a little better in his For Everyone commentary series on Mark. And in a town of only a couple of hundred people in the synagogue, that wouldn't be overly impressive because he wasn't the only person who had such a title. In any event, he is one of the leaders in the synagogue. Now remember, synagogue leaders, Pharisees, scribes, teachers of the law, those who are in the religious leadership of the day, are one of the main sources of opposition against Jesus so far in the gospel. That's what we've seen, right? Well, in this story, Jairus hears that Jesus is coming back across the lake. He's been across the body of water. He's crossed back over to Jairus' side. And so Jairus hears this opportunity because his daughter, his little daughter, is, and somewhere we can, and I'll have to look for this, but I saw somewhere that she was 12 years old. And so part of the connection in the stories is that for the whole time Jairus' daughter has been living and growing up, there's this other woman who's had an issue of bleeding for 12 years. So the stories are linked. Two things are going on at the same time, both of which are going to be addressed by Jesus. So Jairus comes up to Jesus, and on seeing him, what does he do? He falls at his feet and he implores him, "Please come. My little daughter is about to die. Come and lay your hands on her, touch her, so that she will get well and live." It's amazing because Jairus is a synagogue leader in a time where there's a lot of religious controversy and political danger because of this man Jesus. My father passed away last April, and I'm a pastor. We live in a culture where we were at the time experiencing a pandemic, which was still relatively new. There's been a lot of political unrest. There's been a lot of talk of social injustice, a lot of racial tensions, a lot of community issues, a lot of physical sickness, and of course, a lot of theological controversy in the midst of all of this. Religion is always a hot topic, and we're all feeling these tensions over the past year. And what I experienced in losing my dad was that so much of what's on the surface of so many of our minds and hearts just went to the back. It just went to the back. I really didn't care to solve every theological argument anymore. I really didn't care to get involved in political controversies. Not to say those things aren't important, but what I see in the story of Jairus is a man saying, you know what, religion, so-called, and politics are no longer first on my agenda. I just want you to heal my daughter. And I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you're going to do, but based on what I've heard about you, you may be my only hope. And I hear in that an invitation for us. We don't have to have all the answers together. We don't have to know how everything's going to play out. The act of faith is coming to Jesus saying, I don't even know everything there is to know about you, and I don't know how all of this is going to play out. I just know I need your touch. I just need your touch. And you're the only one. You're my last final hope. There is no hope apart from you. Only your touch can bring about what I need in this situation. And that goes for those of us who are grieving. You know, even in losing my dad, it was a season of being comforted by Jesus, knowing only your touch, only the promise of the comfort of the Holy Spirit, the one who is called Comforter, can really bring what I need in this time. So we see this in the story of Jairus, and Jesus has compassion and he goes with him. And on the way, this woman comes up behind him who's had a bleeding issue for 12 years. Now Jesus is on the way to this little girl who's at the point of death. And one thing we have to realize is that even going to her, they're expecting to find a corpse. And indeed they do. Jesus is a rabbi. One of the issues of impurity in Jesus' day is dead bodies, corpses. Corpses were considered ritually impure and unclean, and yet Jesus is going towards that. And on the way, another person who is one of the prime sources of what was considered religiously unclean and impure comes up behind him. Bodily discharges were one of the main subjects of uncleanness and impurity, and especially females. And yet this woman comes to Jesus, this issue of bleeding, and the shame that she must have felt. I mean, many pictures and movies have conveyed this woman kind of crawling on the ground under people's legs, trying to stay out of sight, just to reach up and grab the corner of the hem of his garment and just be unseen. And as soon as she does, she feels herself healed. And Jesus, in this very provocative moment, we don't have many examples of this, Jesus did not actively heal her on purpose. He rather felt the power to leave him, the power to save. Jairus implores that Jesus come off and rescue his daughter so that she would be saved. And this woman touches Jesus and feels herself rescued. And Jesus says, your faith has saved you, or your faith has made you well. In both of these instances, there's a level of fear, and what Jesus invites is faith, and he rewards faith. He will tell the synagogue leader Jairus later in verse 36, do not be afraid any longer, only believe. Do not be afraid any longer, only believe. So this woman is afraid even after Jesus heals her. And we've seen that in stories before too, haven't we? That fear doesn't leave just because Jesus has done something amazing, but rather there's still this fear of what just happened, this fear of now things are different and change is scary, even if it seems at first to be good on the surface. And yet he looks at the woman and he says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Now, isn't that interesting? He doesn't say my power has made you well. He says your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. N.T. Wright, in his commentary that I was reading earlier, talks about how it's really Jesus' power that has to accomplish that in our lives, right? Healing and salvation can only happen by the power of Jesus, but faith, even though faith holds no power in and of itself, it is the vehicle through which Jesus' power must travel. So in all of this, I simply share it with you today and share some of my devotional thoughts along the way. I wonder what this stirs up for you. I wonder where this challenges you. I wonder where you feel this inviting you or beckoning you to take a step further on this journey with Jesus as we meditate on these stories, as we get to know the person of who he is, and as we seek to walk closer with him, that even in the midst of fear, we come to him and say, Lord, I just need your touch. And I don't even know what all that means. I don't even know how to get it. I don't even know what will result once I have it, but I know that I need it. And so in faith, I'm going to come to you, and I'm still a little bit afraid. And Jesus, over and over, patiently says, let your fear go down and let your faith go up. Let your fear go down and let your faith go up. I pray that this would be your reality today as you press in closer to Jesus. Grace and peace.